Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into what is arguably one of the most complex, high-stakes aspects of national security, counterinsurgency. Think about it. When a nation faces internal armed conflict, how exactly should it respond? Do you just go in and try to crush the rebellion with sheer military might? Or do you have to step back and untangle this massive, messy web of historical, ethnic, and socioeconomic factors? We're going to explore how incredibly complex environments demand highly tailored, nuanced strategic responses. As you'll see, a heavy-handed approach isn't always the path to lasting peace. Which brings us right to a fundamental, almost philosophical question right off the bat. Can the same strategy defeat every insurgency? Well, it's definitely tempting to think that military supremacy is just the ultimate answer, right? But if we look closely at the source material, analyzing decades of conflict across South Asia, we quickly realize that a one-size-fits-all military approach often falls completely flat. You see, an insurgency isn't just a standing army. It's an idea. It's a deeply rooted grievance. It's a movement. To actually defeat it, you first have to understand exactly what birthed it in the first place. Okay, let's dive into this. Insurgencies don't just happen in a vacuum. They grow from deep, really tangled roots. It's kind of like a giant puzzle. You typically start with contested sovereignty or maybe a convoluted colonial legacy, which naturally breeds historical grievances. Then, those grievances are weaponized through identity-based mobilization, basically rallying ethnic, linguistic, religious, or tribal groups who feel threatened. Now, when this happens in geographically remote areas that already have a weak state presence, and you add in cross-border linkages, you've got the perfect storm for armed rebellion. Throw in a limited administrative reach where populations feel just completely neglected, and those roots take a really firm hold. To see how these roots actually manifest in the real world, let's map out India's internal security challenges over the decades. What's absolutely fascinating here is the sheer geographical and ideological variety. The state has essentially been fighting three completely different types of wars simultaneously. Up in the northeast, you have conflicts primarily driven by identity-based tribal and ethnic movements that are seeking autonomy. But then you move to central India, and the landscape changes entirely. Here you have left-wing extremism or Naxalism, which was sparked back in 1967. This one is driven largely by economic exploitation and resource deprivation. Then you look at Jammu and Kashmir, and actually, scratch that. It's not just a different landscape, it's an entirely different paradigm. Beginning in 1989, it morphed into a proxy war defined by external cross-border linkages and competing sovereignty claims. So, three distinct environments demanding three entirely different approaches. Let's zoom in on the Northeast first and see how this plays out. This region saw the inception of insurgency in Nagaland way back in 1955, and it later spread out to Mizoram, Manipur, Assam, and Tripura. But instead of getting locked into an endless, brutal cycle of military suppression, the region has largely undergone an incredible three-step transformation. It moved from conflict to negotiation, leading ultimately to integration. The state realized something absolutely crucial. Because these movements were so deeply tied to ethnic and tribal identities, military force alone just wasn't going to cut it. Instead, force was used as an instrument. It became a way to prevent violence and essentially compel warring groups to come to the negotiation table to discuss autonomy, all within the federal framework. Now, the sheer patience required for this negotiation-first approach is staggering. We are literally talking about decades of commitment to political accommodation. You can see it etched right here in history. It starts with the initial Naga Peace Accord in 1975, followed by subsequent ceasefires and talks in 2015. Then you have the highly successful Mizo Peace Accord in 1986, carrying all the way through to the modern era with the Bodo Accord in 2020 and the Tripura Accord in 2024. By actively recognizing diverse identities and devolving power wherever possible, the state continually pulls former militants right back into the national political mainstream. It's a real game changer. Now let's pivot and contrast that with central India and the Naxal movement. Here, the root cause wasn't a fight for a separate ethnic identity at all. It was a massive governance gap. Deep in these resource-rich, forested tribal belts, there was a severe lack of civil administration, basic education, and social welfare. Indigenous populations were facing massive displacements and economic exploitation by landlords. So this created a giant vacuum, a deep, deep sense of neglect. Maoist ideology swept in and filled that gap, providing arms, money, and quick justice to marginalized people. The solution here obviously couldn't just be political treaties. It required a massive sweeping development response to bridge that governance gap before it was too late. To tackle this, the Ministry of Home Affairs rolled out an incredibly structured 8-pillar strategy known as the Samadhan Framework. It's this really clever dual-action approach that simultaneously concentrates on strict security measures alongside major developmental activities. The pillars stand for smart leadership, aggressive strategy, motivation and training, actionable intelligence, dashboard-based KPIs, harnessing technology, action plans for each theater, and severely choking off access to financing. But hey, don't just get bogged down in the acronym. What makes this so uniquely effective is that it fundamentally changes the metric of success. It's not just about winning gunfights anymore. It's about securing and holding territory so that actual roads can be built, telecom towers can go up, and basic administration can finally reach the people. And this brilliantly illustrates the staggering results of that dual action framework. Back in the 2000s, the Naxal presence basically ran straight through the better part of central India like a red corridor, literally controlling over 10 million hectares of forested land. But man, the momentum has completely shifted. Left-wing extremism-affected districts have plummeted from 182 in 2013 down to just 18 by 2025. To put that into perspective, that is a massive operational success. At this aggressive pace of combined development and security, experts project the movement could be entirely eradicated from India by 2026. So, what does this all boil down to? Tackling these incredibly diverse threats required building a comprehensive response model consisting of 4 main pillars. First, security, which relies on highly capable police forces and focused operations. Next is development, which is arguably the most critical. We're talking pushing road and rail networks deep into the hinterlands, providing zero-balance bank accounts so direct cash transfers reach farmers, and making sure mobile data connects far-off populations. Then you have politics, allowing for inclusive political accommodation. And finally, intelligence, aimed at networking and choking insurgent funding. Think about it. When a previously disaffected citizen suddenly gets a bank account, a home, a gas cylinder, and internet access, that insurgent support base literally just evaporates. Now, to really understand why this matters, let's compare this population-centric approach to a purely military-centric model. If we analyze Sri Lanka's counterinsurgency operations, specifically their Elam IV phase, a really stark contrast emerges. Sri Lanka successfully ended their insurgency militarily, for sure, but they did so by applying unbridled force and adopting a model of exclusion, ignoring basic rights and attempting to undermine local culture. As this source material notes, while the violence stopped, the root causes were left completely unaddressed, which leaves this simmering discontent. Conversely, the population-centric model we've just been analyzing is inclusive. It leans heavily on political accommodation and combined development, deploying military force not to crush a population, but specifically to protect civilians and force warring groups back to the negotiating table. Which leaves us with a vital overarching takeaway for any strategic affairs analysis. The goal of a state shouldn't just be to silence the guns, it absolutely must be to integrate the people. You can use force to clear an area, but without essential services following right behind it, the conflict will inevitably return. You must defeat the violence, no question about it, but you have to solve the causes. But that leaves us with one final, pretty pressing question to think about. As the nature of warfare continually evolves into the digital age, will these population-centric models hold up against modern internet-fueled insurgencies? Or is the world on the brink of needing an entirely new playbook?